In the heart of the Wild West, there was a love that wasn't allowed to exist. Pause. Slight echo effect. She was a healer. Gentle. Brave. The preacher's daughter. He was a soldier. Haunted. Scarred. A stranger to the town, but not to pain. Softer piano enters. Wind whistles faintly. They met beneath the chapel's cross, where the town whispered of salvation and secretly plotted damnation. Music grows deeper, heartbeat like rhythm. Their love was quiet, forbidden, and unstoppable. But when the town discovered the truth, they didn't judge her. They punished her. Sharp sound cue, crackling fire, chains tightening. Chained to a tree, left for the flames. Branded not by sin, but by love. Music swells to tension. But what the town forgot was that this soldier had given her everything. And he was ready to give his last breath, to take her back. Gun cocking sound, soft thunder in distance. Now, under the unforgiving sun, a man rides into hell with one promise, whispered with intensity. He's not here to fight the town. He's here to end it, if he must. Music drops to silence. One heartbeat sound. This is not just a story of love. It's a story of fire, of freedom, and of a man who refused to let her die alone. The desert gave no mercy. Its sun burned without pity, and the wind carried no comfort, only silence and the whispers of ghosts. In that silence, a woman knelt beneath a twisted mesquite tree, chained at the waist, her torn green dress smudged with dust and dried blood. Her hands trembled as fire licked at the dry grass inches from her legs. Her name was Clara, and the world had turned on her. She had not always been a prisoner. Once, she was the healer of Ash Hollow, a sun-baked town tucked between buttes and badlands. People came to her when sickness struck their homes or bullets tore through their kin. She asked for nothing in return, but was paid in fear and suspicion. They called her the Witch of Hollow Creek when they thought she wasn't listening, her herbs too strong, her eyes too knowing. Still, she served them. Even when they spat near her feet, even when they left her offerings outside her cabin only to deny they'd ever come. She stayed. Until the man with the wounded heart walked out of the desert. He collapsed just beyond her fence, coated in blood and sand. His lips were cracked, and his shirt was soaked in red. Clara knelt beside him and pressed her ear to his chest. The heartbeat was faint, but still there. She dragged him inside, stripped his shirt, and worked through the night. She stitched the jagged wound across his side with steady hands, her touch soft despite the roughness of her fingers. The fever was brutal, but he clung to life. He awoke 2 days later, blinking into the dim candlelight of her kitchen. His first words were barely more than a rasp. "Where am I?" "Alive," she said simply. His name was Elias Ward, and Clara listened without interruption as he told her his story. A former military officer, discharged without honor for defying orders during a skirmish with native scouts. He refused to fire on a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. The commander had called it insubordination. Elias had called it decency. Now, he had nowhere to go, no uniform to wear, no brothers in arms to call his own. Clara asked him nothing more. She just poured him water, handed him bread, and returned to grinding the poultices that had saved his life. In the days that followed, Elias stayed, too weak to leave, and maybe too afraid to try. She gave him the cot near the fire. He watched her work. He saw the way she touched every leaf, every root, like it had meaning. He noticed the worn spine of a book she kept under her pillow, a collection of poems about lost battles and buried love. When he was strong enough to walk, he asked if he could help. "Can you mend fences?" she asked. "I can try," he said. He did more than try. He rebuilt the entire east wall of her corral. He fetched water, chopped wood, and fixed the leaky roof. One morning, Clara found him on her porch, holding a bowl of stew he had made himself, burned but honest. She laughed for the first time in months. Ash Hollow, however, was not built for laughter. The townsfolk watched him. Whispers grew. Men in the saloon leaned over whiskey glasses, wondering why Clara was suddenly smiling again. The preacher warned his congregation of wayward men with soiled pasts who seduce our women into sin. They heard him loud and clear. One afternoon, Elias came into town to trade. The stable hand spat near his boots. "We don't forget cowards," he sneered. "I didn't ask you to," Elias replied. He didn't tell Clara about it. But she knew. She always knew. The tension had settled over their quiet home like dust on a windowsill, always there, hard to clean. Still, they found peace in each other. In the hush of evening, Elias would read to her from her book, stumbling over poetic words with a rough soldier's tongue. She taught him how to bind wounds properly. He taught her how to shoot. The night he kissed her, it wasn't grand or sudden. It was quiet. Her hand brushed his arm as she passed him the lantern, and he turned. Their lips met like it had always been meant to happen. And in that moment, neither of them was broken. In that moment, they were just whole. But Ash Hollow had eyes. That same night, a shadow stood at the edge of her garden, watching. Clara noticed footprints the next morning, half covered in sand. She said nothing. Elias noticed the cold silence when he returned from town. Doors shut quickly. Children were pulled indoors. And the sheriff, an old warhound who still wore his gun low and his voice lower, stopped Elias outside the general store. "She's not for you," he said. "Whatever kindness she's got, it's not yours to keep." Elias didn't respond. But the words stuck to his ribs like thorns. That evening he asked Clara, "What if we left? Rode north. Found a place where no one knows your name or mine?" She looked at him, the firelight catching in her eyes. "I've never been north," she said. "But if you're there, I'll go." He left the next morning to secure travel papers and supplies. A 2-day trip, no more? She stood on the porch and waved as he rode into the horizon. She never saw him disappear behind the ridge. That night they came. Boots crunching over sand. Knuckles rapping on her door, then breaking it down. 5 men. No faces she didn't recognize. The preacher among them. His hand held a chain, and his eyes held fury. "You brought sin here," he said. "Now you'll burn it out." No one answered her screams. And as fire curled around the base of the tree, Clara whispered the only name she trusted. "Elias." And somewhere in the distance, beyond the dunes, someone heard.
The sun hung heavy over Ash Hollow, baking the dust into brittle cracks beneath boot heels and wagon wheels. Weeks had passed since Elias and Clara first dreamed of escape, but their dream remained just that, distant, delicate, and dangerously fragile. Though their love had deepened in silence and shadow, the world beyond Clara's cabin had grown louder with each passing day. Elias took a job at the stable. It wasn't much, just the sweat and stink of horses, but it gave him purpose. He kept to himself, eyes down, hands busy, and mouth shut. But in a town like Ash Hollow, silence was never a shield. Clara continued tending to the sick, even those whose families whispered against her behind closed doors. When a miner's son fell ill with fever, Clara spent 3 nights grinding roots, soaking cloths, whispering prayers that her hands still remembered from childhood. The boy lived. His mother cried. And yet, when Clara passed her in town days later, the woman turned her face and walked away. The tension no longer crept. It lingered like smoke. Neighbors who once nodded at her now shut their doors before she reached them. Stray mutterings followed her through the market. "Too close to him," one voice hissed. "Letting a soldier curse her land." Another, more venomous. "Wasn't natural before. Now she's just brazen." Elias noticed it, too. The way men watched him hitching horses, how laughter at the saloon turned sharp when he walked past. He tried to shrug it off. But the worst came not from strangers, it came from those with authority. Sheriff Ryland called him aside one hot afternoon, just outside the general store. The lawman leaned against a post, squinting at the sun like it annoyed him. His voice was low, measured. "You fixin' to make her your wife?" Elias didn't blink. "That's the plan." Ryland shifted his jaw, then spit into the dirt. She's always been odd, but quiet. Kept to herself. Folks managed to pretend she belonged. But now you stirred things up. I didn't stir anything, Elias said. I just loved her. That's enough, Ryland replied. Sometimes that's too much. That night, Elias sat with Clara beneath the sycamore behind her cabin, watching the stars blink awake one by one. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her breath warm on his neck. I want to marry you, he said, voice like a vow. I want to leave this place and never hear another whisper again. She didn't answer right away. The wind brushed through the trees like a hush over truth. Then she looked up and kissed him, slow and full of sorrow. We'll leave, she whispered. We will. The next morning, Elias saddled his horse and rode for Stockton, a 2-day journey to file for marriage papers and gather what they need to start over. Clara waved from the porch, hand pressed over her heart like she could hold the moment still. He didn't see the figure watching from behind the preacher's fence. Within hours, word spread. The woman had accepted a soldier's hand. It didn't matter that Elias had never raised a voice, never drawn his weapon in anger, never asked anything of the town. He had loved her. And in doing so, confirmed every dark thing they'd chosen to believe. The preacher called a meeting. At first, a few men resisted. She saved my wife, one said. Helped my boy walk again, said another. But fear and guilt are easy to stoke, and Reverend Cale was a man who knew how to speak in fire. She walks with sin, feeds it, weds it, and now seeks to birth it into our town, he thundered. If we do nothing, the devil will dance at our table and drink from our cups. By dusk, her garden had been trampled. The small cross she nailed above her door was torn down and split in two. Someone threw a stone through her window. Still, Clara stayed. She stood in the ruins of her garden and rebuilt her fence. She replaced the broken glass. She swept the shards with slow, even strokes. She didn't cry. But she didn't sleep that night. She sat in her chair, waiting for morning, hoping the world would calm with sunrise. It didn't. They came in the hour just before dawn, when the sky is neither night nor day and the world holds its breath. 5 of them. Men she had once healed. Men who'd eaten at her table. Faces cloaked in scarves, hands clenched around rope and steel. They didn't knock. Clara screamed when they broke the door, but no one answered. No one came. They dragged her barefoot through the dirt, tied her wrists and ankles, and lifted her like a sack of grain. She kicked. She begged. But it was as if her voice had become smoke, seen but never heard. The preacher waited near the edge of town, already dressed in black. He held a book in one hand, and a chain in the other. The time for mercy is over, he said. They rode into the desert in silence, the sky bleeding orange at the edges. When they reached a twisted tree, they chained her to it. The wind picked up. Clara's hair lashed across her face. One of the men poured oil into a ring around the roots. Please, she whispered. He's coming back. He'll. But the preacher only raised his hand. Let the fire cleanse what kindness could not. They lit the flames. And in the curling smoke, Clara screamed only one name. Elias. Far beyond the ridgeline, a dust trail rose, faint, fast, and furious, carving toward the fire like fate on horseback.
Elias rode hard. The wind burned his eyes, and the sun hammered his back, but he didn't stop. Every hoofbeat was a promise, every breath a prayer. He hadn't slept since leaving Stockton. He'd felt it, that twist in his gut, the weight in his chest the moment he turned to go. Something wasn't right. The marriage papers rustled in his coat pocket, now crumpled and damp with sweat. Useless now. Paper couldn't hold her, couldn't protect her from the world that hated too easily and forgave too slowly. He remembered her face as he rode away, calm, hopeful, unaware that the very people she had healed would be the ones to unmake her. The ridge came into view just as the sky began to gray with dusk. That's when he saw it, smoke, thick and unnatural, rising from the far end of the desert. His heart slammed against his ribs like a war drum. He urged his horse faster. As he crested the hill, the world narrowed. Flames curled at the base of the twisted mesquite tree where Clara had once picked herbs. She was there, small and shackled in the fire's glow, her dress torn, her face turned skyward. The wind carried her scream, ragged and raw, slicing through the air like a blade. Around her stood a circle of men, faces half lit by firelight, watching not with shame but with righteous silence. And among them, the preacher stood tallest. Elias didn't think. He acted. He kicked his horse hard, and it roared forward. The first shot came before anyone turned, a warning into the air. The second, aimed lower, shattered the oil lantern near the flames. Fire sputtered sideways, catching the dry bush and throwing the mob into confusion. "Get back!" Elias roared as he leapt off the horse mid-charge. He landed hard, knees screaming, but he was already moving. The revolver in his hand barked once, sending a bullet into the ground between the preacher's feet. The old man stumbled back, his hand reaching for the Bible like it might shield him from bullets. Elias didn't spare him another look. He rushed to Clara, tore at the chain around her waist. Her eyes were glassy, smoke-choked, but she was alive. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," he rasped, pulling her into his arms as the fire crept closer. Gunshots rang out behind them. Not all the men had run. One bullet slammed into the mesquite behind Elias, splintering bark. Another ripped through his sleeve, grazing skin. He turned, one arm around Clara, one hand raising the revolver. His shot dropped a man mid-step, someone he recognized from the stable. Guilt twisted in his gut, but not enough to stop him. He wasn't fighting for vengeance. He was fighting for her. A figure charged him from the left. Elias turned too slow, saw the glint of a knife, but Clara reached up, grabbing the attacker's arm with what little strength she had. It was enough. Elias drove the butt of his revolver into the man's jaw, dropping him like a stone. The remaining men hesitated, eyes darting between the fire and the soldier who stood like a storm between them and their hate. The preacher tried to rally them. "Stand your ground! This is God's will." "No," Elias growled, voice sharp and deadly. "This is murder." Then he aimed, not at a man, but at the sky, and fired twice. The sound echoed across the plain, rolling like thunder. Then came silence. One by one, the mob broke. They dropped weapons. Turned. Fled. Even the preacher, defiant to the last, stumbled back as if touched by lightning. His words faltered. "You'll answer for this, you'll both burn for your sins." "No," Elias said. "We already have." He turned to Clara, cradling her gently as the fire hissed behind them. She was breathing, shallow but steady. Her fingers clutched his collar like she might vanish without that grip. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and lifted her into his arms. She was weightless, but he knew the heaviness of what they'd endured would never fully leave. Together they walked from the flames. As they crossed the darkened plain, a soft rain began to fall, light at first, then steadier. It sizzled against the dying fire, casting steam into the air like rising ghosts. The desert, silent witness to violence, now seemed to offer penance. Elias said nothing as they moved. There was nothing left to say. Words were ash. But he held her tighter. In the distance, the edge of the storm began to break, revealing a sky so wide and clear it seemed like a promise. They had no town now. No home. But they had survived. And that, for now, was enough. The morning after the fire, the world seemed unnaturally quiet. Elias stirred beside Clara, who lay wrapped in his coat beneath the shade of a brittle acacia tree. The desert around them shimmered with the heat of a rising sun, the air dry and still. Ashes from the night before clung to Clara's hair, streaking her cheeks in gray lines like war paint. She blinked slowly, pain in every movement, but her gaze found him. "You didn't let them win," she said, her voice no louder than a whisper. He nodded, brushing a strand of soot-streaked hair from her brow, but said nothing. They had traveled only a few miles after the escape, both too exhausted to go farther. Clara's feet were blistered and raw, her wrists bruised where the chains had cut into them. Elias, though unharmed, bore the weight of every mile in his posture. He hadn't slept. His hand remained close to the revolver at his hip, instinct sharper now, coiled for danger even in silence. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We keep moving," he said. "We find water. Shelter. Then we start again." Clara tried to sit up but winced, pain coursing through her ribs. He steadied her with one arm. "We could go north," she murmured. "There's a mission past the canyons. They don't ask questions there. They take in the broken." Elias looked out across the desert, where heat waves blurred the horizon. "Then that's where we go." By midday, they reached the edge of a dry riverbed. The bones of trees long dead jutted from the sand like twisted fingers. Clara's steps were slow, deliberate, her breath catching every few paces, but she didn't complain. The silence between them was not heavy, it was sacred. The kind that only two people who had survived fire together could understand. He noticed it first, a lizard skittering from the bank of the riverbed, where green shoots poked through the sand. "There's water nearby," Elias said, guiding Clara down the embankment. Beneath the cracked surface, a small pool glimmered faintly. Muddy but alive. He cupped his hands and brought the water to her lips. Her eyes closed as she drank, her throat working with effort. "Tastes like freedom," she said. He smiled for the first time in days. As the sun dipped lower, they found shelter in the hollow of a rock overhang. Elias made a small fire from driftwood and dried brush, carefully shielding the flame from sight. Clara leaned against the wall, the orange glow painting her features in flickering light. The bruises on her arms had darkened, and her dress was still singed at the hem, but her eyes were clear. "I never thought they'd do it," she said suddenly, her voice taut. "Not them. Not the people I grew up with. I treated their sick. I buried their dead. They were afraid," Elias said, staring into the fire. She turned to him. "Afraid of love? Afraid of what love gave you, the strength to defy them. That scares small men." Her lip trembled. "And if you hadn't come back? You knew I would." She nodded, tears brimming. "Yes. I did." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night. Coyotes cried far off in the hills. Wind passed over the sand in soft moans. Clara reached for Elias's hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Will you still marry me, soldier?" she asked. He turned to her, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Clara, I was already yours." She exhaled a shaky breath, her shoulders loosening, her heart unclenching. In that broken land, beneath a sky still healing from the fire's smoke, two scarred souls clung to a fragile dream, a life where love wasn't punished and faith didn't wear a noose. The next morning, they began walking again. Every step was slow, measured. Elias carried most of the weight, including Clara's small satchel of herbs, the only thing she'd salvaged from the cabin. She insisted on keeping it close, even though the fabric was singed and the contents half lost. The desert changed as they moved north. The air cooled slightly, the sand gave way to patches of scrub grass. Once they passed a weathered milestone marked with a hand-painted symbol, a cross and a circle. Clara recognized it. "We're close." They reached the mission by nightfall. It wasn't grand, just a series of adobe buildings tucked between jagged hills, surrounded by wind-worn fences. Smoke curled from a chimney, and the soft sound of singing drifted from an open chapel window. A woman greeted them at the gate. Her hair was silver, her hands worn, and her eyes kind. Elias stepped forward. "We're not asking for much. Just shelter. A place to rest. She's hurt." The woman studied Clara's face, the bruises, the hollow cheeks. Then she looked at Elias, the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he bore without complaint. "You've come far," she said. "Come in. We'll give you peace, for however long you need it." Inside the mission, they found warmth. Clara was bathed and bandaged. Elias was given a clean cot, fresh water, and a place to breathe. For the first time in days, they weren't running. For the first time in months, they slept without fear. And in the small garden behind the mission chapel, Clara planted the last of her herbs in a patch of soft earth. Lavender, thyme, and a single seed wrapped in a burned scrap of linen. She knelt over it, hands in the soil, whispering a prayer not of vengeance, but of hope. Because sometimes, even after everything is taken, even after the fire and betrayal, after the pain and the running, ashes can still bloom.